Hey everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a dungeon master that adds a questionable stat to the player's character sheets. A story about a petty dungeon master that thinks that they are getting back at a player in a childish way for leaving his Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and a whole lot more. But before we get into that, I hope you consider liking the video, commenting, and subscribing in order to help feed the algorithm dragon. If not for me, then how about for Luna? She just got spayed, so she is a bit loopy due to her pain meds. But with that said, let's get into some DnD horror stories. Dungeon Master demands to know a woman's, quote, body count in Session 0 by Reddit user Whole Resolution 5678. About 3 months ago, I decided to suck it up and drive down to the game shop after years of making excuses due to the distance and my hectic work schedule, which is thankfully now a lot more orderly. It didn't take long before I found someone who was willing to DM. He was a regular on Saturdays, and was also desperate for some D&D, so we both agreed to get a game going. He got his game announced on the Game Shop website, and in 2 weeks we had 8 players, 7 men, including myself, and 1 woman. She ended up playing the only female character in the campaign, a tiefling warlock, to which Dungeon Master said, "Oh, the horny race." She gave him a cringe look and said, "I'm just here to kill ASMR, LOL. Dungeon Master then laughed really obnoxiously. And then there's me, a halfling wizard. Session 0 was basically an intro session for our characters, and the Dungeon Master let us explore the sort of hub town of the campaign and talk to some, quote, extraplanar spirits, which were basically there to tell us some campaign rules in a unique way, i.e. no metagaming, funky dice, etc. As we begin talking to one of the extraplanar spirits that is going over our character sheets with us to iron out any potential mistakes and letting some of the really unfortunate players reroll. But then, this spirit asks the tiefling, "So, I am reading your backstory, but I haven't seen anything about your body count. Mind clearing that up for me?" She then just said, "It's not important." He then said, "Oh, it very much is," with a wicked smile. She awkwardly chuckled and said, "Stop being weird. You're not getting my body count." Dungeon Master then said, "Oh, come on. It's relevant to the campaign. Your sexual market modifier will be influenced by it." I wish he was joking, but he actually showed us the modified character sheet with, yes, a quote, sexual market score and modifier. She started obviously getting pissed and pointed out, accurately, that he didn't ask any of us guys about their male characters or the genderless plasmoid sexual history, and he said, "A key that can open many doors is a master key, but a lock that opens for many keys is a shitty lock." He then joked about how Confucius and Aristotle both lived by this quote. And this jackass started laughing like he was being funny in an irreverent humor kind of way. Nobody else was laughing. He then shook his head and just said, "Fine." He then looks directly at her with a shit-eating grin and says, "Let's see how ran through you really are." He looks down at his dice bag and grabs it. "A nat 20 means you're a virgin, and a nat 1 means you are for the streets." And then kept laughing at his own jokes as she just shook her head and left. Then, me and a couple of the guys followed shortly after, while the Dungeon Master rolled and then started trying to get us back by trying to pivot and claim it was a joke and that he just has an effed up sense of humor. He gave up after a while and just played with the remainers until he could find adequate replacements. We ended up doing another game a few weeks later, with a better dungeon master, and we ended up actually becoming friends. TLDR, Dungeon Master tries to find out a character's body count in Session 0 through a ghost NPC, thinking he can find out how, quote, ran through the player was. We left and played our own game and became friends. Now, I do have to say that the DM had a pretty interesting and unique way of running a Session 0 by role-playing the creation of the characters. Though the Dungeon Master should have asked the players first if they were okay with sexual themes before springing out that question, especially to the only woman of the group. It was pretty obvious that this made the tiefling player uncomfortable, and the Dungeon Master should have read her body language and stopped afterwards. But instead, he kept insisting, to the point of rolling her, quote, body count stat for her. I don't blame her or OP and some of the other players for just noping out of there and starting a different game. Seriously, if the Dungeon Master wanted to play a sex-centered role-playing game, he should have just played Fatale. Don't look it up. Let's move on. Player threw coffee on the Dungeon Master over an argument. By Reddit user Downtown Debate 8075. We have been playing for 3 months now. The players are me and 3 other people. One of them is Sarah. She is playing a Dex fighter, while I am a paladin. When she found out that I was playing a paladin, she had said how it's the, quote, lamest class, and that only incels play paladin. I still don't know what that means, or if she was even serious when she said this. Anyways, we're both frontliners, so she tries to often get a competition going on who will get the last kill, in which my lawful good paladin is never interested. Our party was on a quest to retrieve a relic from the grave of a legendary paladin from my player character's order. The relic turned out to be a greatsword, in which you needed to be lawful good, as well as have a strength of 18 or higher to carry. Sarah's character reached the sword before the rest of the party and tried to lift it, but she couldn't move it and got some damage from touching it. None of the rest of us touched it until our wizard investigated it and found that only I in our party could lift it. Sarah got pissed at this and said that the Dungeon Master had made this on the spot to humiliate her. He said that he had not. It was a weapon belonging to a lawful good hero who rejected anyone with a morality that the previous owner didn't agree with. She kept blaming him for trying to make a fool out of her for a while, and ended up throwing her coffee all over him. So now, we're 1 player short because the Dungeon Master refuses to let her play anymore. Well, I definitely can't blame the Dungeon Master for kicking the fighter player after that. In fact, if the coffee was still hot, that would be considered assault. Heck, even if it wasn't still hot. It sounds like the fighter's player had a bit of main character syndrome, mixed with a bit of character bleed, in order to get that upset about not being able to pull out that sword. And I'm sure if she had a cooler head, that the Dungeon Master would have eventually put in place a way for her to get her own special item. Then there was the comment that only incels play paladins. I think I'm with OP here, with the question of, what does that even mean? Anyway, hopefully OP's game can find a new, saner player, and they keep the campaign going. On to the next story. So I had a horror story come back to haunt me. By Reddit user Tactical Pixie 1138. At the time of the incident happening, I just shrugged it off and ignored it. Though last night, it came back to haunt me. Before the COVID lockdowns, I was playing at the store close to where I lived. I was between campaigns, and so I looked for a group with a seat open for a player. I found one, and I joined. The campaign was going okay for a while, when the Dungeon Master decided to include a scene where my character was going to be kidnapped, and later, raped. Now, we had a Session 0, and while sexual activities were fine, I had said that I wasn't interested in that sort of thing for me. No trauma in my past. I just didn't want to, since that's not the sort of thing that I want in my fantasy RPG. So I argued with the DM, and the DM put his foot down and said, "This is happening. It's for the plot." I asked, "Why? Am I going to get pregnant?" I'm not up for that either, since we're months away from the big battle, and if my character is pregnant, I can't fight. It was some ritual at a certain celestial event that we had to disrupt, but I can't remember the details. Arguments ensued, and the other players sided with the DM, so I said, "Nope," and packed my stuff and left. As I was leaving, the Dungeon Master was talking about the horrible things that he was going to do with my character if I didn't come back. I just said whatever and kept walking. There's a bit of a fast forward of time between then and last night. Lockdown hits, and I'm playing online with the people who frequent the store across town that had recently opened up. Things are going well, and I don't think about those guys much, if at all. Lockdowns lift, and we finally all meet at the new store, and we keep playing. Our town starts a project to revitalize the downtown area, and the rents of the stores rise. The store that this happened at closes, and the owner decided to concentrate his attention to his other store 2 towns over, where the other college is at. Last night, I was sitting at the table at our current store, waiting for my group to arrive, and who do I see walking in? It's my former dungeon master and some of the crew, as well as some new players. He sees me and leers at me with an evil grin. "You wouldn't believe the things I've been doing to your character. Tell him, Dave." Names are changed and all that. One of the new players looks embarrassed and mumbles, "At least once a session, he's doing something to her. Never knew it was someone's character. Sorry." The Dungeon Master grins even more and says, "What do you think about that?" I respond, "It's not my character you're doing that to. It stopped being my character the minute I put her in my bag and left. You're doing this to a figment of your imagination, not mine. Go away." At that point, my new Dungeon Master came in, with the rest of the table in tow, and got down to some good old hacking and slashing. They went to a table on the other side of the play area, and started their session. At one point, we heard an, "Oh man, this is BS," and my former DM was packing his things in a huff, with the rest of the table going with him. Later, I asked the store staff what was up, and they told me that they got complaints from other tables of the SA stuff that was being played out at his table, and they were asked to either knock it off or leave. My former dungeon master got angry and opted for the latter option. Not really that much of a horror story, I know, but it's one that came out of nowhere to haunt me. What type of man-child would think that doing something to somebody's character that no longer plays at their table would be any type of insult to said player? Like OP said, it stopped being her character the moment she left. Thinking that that type of thing is revenge for a player leaving is not only really stupid, but a bit psychotic. It almost sounds to me that that dungeon master had some sort of sick, twisted fantasy about that subject matter, and uses the Dungeons & Dragons games that he runs as a way to facilitate it. Good on the store for kicking him out after the other tables near his heard him doing that roleplay and complained about it. While you can have themes like that in games, as long as everyone at the table is comfortable with it, role-playing that type of thing in a game in a public setting probably wasn't a smart idea. But as far as I can tell, this Dungeon Master probably has few of those. Let's move on. You can always run away, except that's all we do. By Reddit user, Flare Supply. This is a funny little tale from a couple of years ago. We've all heard this advice before. You can always run away. And this campaign was one where that was advice our Dungeon Master wanted us to know. but maybe was a little too intent on letting us know. Session 1. An attack on the city that we are in by demons. Well, we're low leveled, so of course we have to run. Session 2. We hide out in a tavern and get in a bar fight with level 20 adventurers, so of course we have to run, again. Session 3. We investigate the woods, and wouldn't you know it, the hag we stumble across has 15 zombies, and as we're trying to thin the hordes, Dungeon Master says, "You could always run if you feel overwhelmed." Session 4. I'm really not exaggerating about the number of sessions. We encounter the demons, again, and haven't leveled up since we have exclusively come across things that we can't even try to kill yet. So we run, again. After 4 sessions of literally not being able to do anything, we ask the Dungeon Master, who just reminds us, "You're low leveled. If you feel overpowered, I want to teach you that you can always run." So after that, we ran and made a new table and campaign. Yeah, it sounds like that campaign was going nowhere fast. Well, aside from the party's run speed. I can understand trying to get your players to understand that running from a battle is always an option, and would even forgive an opening of a campaign with such a situation. But to do it constantly for 4 sessions, without giving the players a situation that they can actually win, is a tad overkill. So I don't blame the players for quitting that campaign and starting up a new one. Let's move on to the next post. They took the nails out while you were downstairs. By Reddit user O'Dandy. This story involves a DM who A. doesn't understand or like the basic rules of D&D, and B. made up the funniest, annoying AF at the time, excuse I've ever heard a DM come up with before. I should note that this DM is a very experienced player for many years, and has ran multiple one-shots before. He is not new. Basically, we're doing a Keys from the Golden Vault heist, and we're tasked with taking a painting from the Thieves Guild inside their HQ, which is in a manor. 2 important details were revealed when I and the other players asked and made rolls about the manor. The windows were, quote, boarded up, and the balcony over the main entrance is, quote, 30 feet high, where a guard was standing. Here are the cliff notes. The party set the stables on fire of the manor, and let a tiger loose in it as well. When the balcony guard ran away, we went inside and fought 4 dudes pretty easily, with only 1 person getting hit. Found a secret entrance to a basement, and fought 1 swarm of piranhas, and found nothing else in the literal labyrinth of a basement. Came back up the stairs, and found the door we entered was now locked. Surprise, 2 enemies were waiting outside. Why did they lock the door though? Mind you, the manor is now on fire. All of this was happening while the house is about to be burned down. We incapacitate the big enemy before it had a turn. We nabbed 2 nat 20s out of it as well, before it got a turn. The guildmaster walks in from the door behind us and throws the tan pelt of the tiger we sent in earlier at us. I jokingly mock the fact that tanning and skinning would have taken a much longer time than the 1 hour that we were downstairs, but the dungeon master doesn't respond. Next, the balcony guard, 30 feet up, jumps down from the balcony to shoot an arrow at us. I ask, so didn't he take 3d6 damage and fall prone since he leaped from the 30-foot balcony? Dungeon Master says, I guess, if we're playing by the rules, then no, he wouldn't do something as stupid as that. My man jumped from a balcony. What do you mean? The big guy who we crit 2 times uses Cone of Cold on us. I mention, so what did the guildmaster roll? Cone of Cold is a 60-foot cone, and she's right behind me. Then Dungeon Master spends about 2 minutes figuring out how to move Cone of Cold so he doesn't damage the enemy he placed with the spell he cast. And finally, near the end of round 1, the boarded up windows are broken into by like 4 guards. I asked the DM, so they used their action to do that, right? You said the windows were boarded up. The Dungeon Master, with no hint of irony or sarcasm, says with a blank face, "Well, they took the nails out of the boards while you guys were downstairs and placed them back in the windows so they could walk through." There was dead silence, as everyone is obviously stunlocked around this leap of logic that we were just served. But man, in hindsight, it's so funny. Mind you, this all happened while the, quote, manor was catching fire from the stable fire. The skinning and tanning, the locking of the door, the removal of nails and placing boards back into place. Yeah, we'll do this while our HQ is on fire. TLDR. Dungeon Master makes really goofy decisions for his NPCs while their house is on fire, and claims that while the party was in a basement, the NPCs managed to unnail boards and place them perfectly back into place to fool us into thinking that they were boarded up, all the while the house was on fire. It sounds to me like this Dungeon Master wanted this whole quest that the party was on to be more challenging to the players. But due to some luck on the player's part, it didn't turn out that way. So the Dungeon Master just started doing those things to try to make the encounter a bit more challenging, but just wasn't that great at thinking on his feet, thus the nonsensical things that happened. So while it may have been frustrating at the time for OP, at least they can look back on it in hindsight and have a bit of a chuckle at it. Let's move on. Getting interrupted and talked over constantly, but Dungeon Master says that's what his player character would do. By Reddit user, Link Stole My Yarn. I'm playing in my first real campaign. I've only played alone with a Dungeon Master before, and we've been playing once a week since December. I'm a naturally shy and quiet person, so I decided to have some fun and play a bard. We're playing over Discord, so interrupting each other happens sometimes. We've all adjusted, and now there's basically an acknowledgement of who is going to speak next when the interruptions happen. Except for one player that interrupts and talks over people constantly. Our party consists of me, the Dungeon Master's girlfriend, 3 of his cousins, one of which is his best friend, and the problem player, my best friend, and 2 of the DM's other friends. The problem is that the other female player and I get talked over a lot by problem player. He's taken on the leader role, which is whatever, but he'll make party decisions with the input from only one person. He monopolizes roleplay opportunities when it makes no sense for a wizard to do so. It's not something that has only happened a few times, but the other players are better at, in turn, talking over him to get their points across. I guess I'm most upset about not being able to play my character. I don't want the focus on me all the time, but I'd like to do bard stuff when it comes up. We've had a lot of combat, which is obviously not something a low-level bard excels at. The few instances we've had that were social and or perfect for a bard to swoop in, he's trampled all over me. I'll get a couple words out, and he's jumped in and taken over, even when it makes more sense to let me or someone else do it. For context, he also did this to the cleric when we were talking to a priest about vampires. It just makes the whole thing not fun. I've talked to the Dungeon Master about it multiple times. It happened a lot from several people to the women in the group at the beginning, but his latest answer was, "That's what the player character would do. When he does it, scream back, and the Discord will just be full of you guys screaming at each other." I don't really find this helpful at all, but I don't know what to do. What's the point of playing if I'm just going to sit there and not get to say anything? I don't know if it's because this is the DM's first campaign. It's his best friend. He's trying not to show favoritism towards me, or what it is. He even asked if it was actually happening, or if I just felt like it was happening. Even when he's had to ask me to repeat myself multiple times because I was interrupted. I'm overall not having fun, and get really anxious every week when it's the day that we play. Is yelling over the other player character really the answer? I really don't have any idea what I should do, and would appreciate any advice. Well, normally, I would say to talk to the Dungeon Master about it, but it seems like OP already tried that, and the Dungeon Master was less than helpful. So I would say perhaps talk to the player in question, and tell them how you feel. Maybe he's doing it without realizing it, and will give more roleplay time to the other members of the party after that. And if you're playing on Discord with cameras on, perhaps suggest a card with a symbol in it or something that you can hold up when you want to have your character say something. Honestly, I think communication is the best bet here to rectify the situation, even though OP's boyfriend, the DM, seems like they don't want to deal with it. Though, what would you all suggest to OP in this situation? But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.